As former health agencies contradict their own past assurances, what does the new civil war within the scientific elite reveal about how deeply politicised COVID and science itself have become, and how dangerous that corruption of truth really is? A rupture is opening inside the scientific establishment, and it is exposing something many people were told never to notice. Science is not immune to power. It never has been. What is unfolding now is not a sudden crisis of credibility, but a long-delayed reckoning between an old scientific ruling class that demanded obedience during COVID and a new officialdom that is quietly admitting what was once treated as heresy. For years, the public was instructed to believe that the science spoke with one voice. To question official guidance was framed as ignorance or malice. Debate was not merely discouraged, but morally condemned. Yet today, the same institutions that enforced that silence are beginning to fracture. The US Food and Drug Administration is now investigating deaths potentially linked to COVID-19 vaccines across multiple age groups. Former CDC Director Dr. Robert Redfield has publicly called for the removal of mRNA COVID vaccines altogether.
You know, I really would like to see the mRNA vaccine use curtailed. And personally, I'd like to see it eliminated. All right, because I think there's too many unknowns. When I give you an mRNA vaccine, what I do is I turn your body into a spike protein production factory. And spike protein is a very immunotoxic protein. But I don't know how much you make, and I don't know how long you make it.
I've met Redfield. He's a decent, good man. Robert Redfield's position in 2025 would have been considered radical in 2019, and he's a pretty mainstream and accepted scientist. These are not fringe figures. They are the products of the very system that once policed dissent. The implications are enormous. If vaccines that were described as unequivocally safe are now subject to death investigations, then the story the public was told was at best radically incomplete. And at worst, it was deliberately curated to protect authority rather than truth. This is where the war inside science becomes visible. On one side are figures like Redfield and the regulators now tightening approval standards, responding belatedly to real-world harm signals. On the other are the defenders of the old order, such as former FDA vaccine advisor Dr. Paul Offit, who has condemned stricter federal vaccine approval pathways as dangerous and irresponsible. The charges revealing dangerous to whom? Irresponsible to which interests?
You're always waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it did drop. I mean, with the mRNA vaccines, there was myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart muscle, primarily in boys 16 to 29 years of age, primarily after the second dose, primarily within 4 days, but generally it was transient and self-resolving. So it really wasn't that bad. That was a very small price to pay, I think, for that vaccine.
It's a small price to pay for him because he's getting backhanders and royalty checks at the FDA, something that's common practice, I understand, within the various regulatory bodies, actual royalty payments connected to products that they endorse. That's even when they don't come out of the FDA and take on a job in a pharmaceutical company, as all these people did. I read that list actually when I did that Maha show. Check that out. Look at all these people that have subsequently taken jobs. And now he's on the TV flogging his book. To him, from a cost-benefit perspective, it makes tremendous sense. But if you're one of the dead children, you don't really have a book deal to look forward to. More just a slow deterioration and potentially eternal life if you've surrendered to the Lord. But, you know, book deals.
Paul Offit, perhaps the most widely quoted defender of vaccine safety. He's gone so far as to say babies can theoretically tolerate, quote, 10,000 vaccines at once.
In theory. Communism works in theory. It's an outrageous thing for someone to say that a baby could take 10,000 vaccines at once. Think of anything that you could do 10,000 of at once. Like 10,000 bananas at once would be very, very dangerous. You'd start putting them in bodily orifices that are not designed for that. It's a ridiculous claim to have made, and one that you would probably only make if you benefited financially from babies getting up to 10,000 vaccines at once, which will probably, at the current rate of growth, be the vaccine schedule by about 2030. Who wants their baby to be put forward for a 10,000 vaccine theory test for dear old Paul Offit? They call him Fuck Offit because that's what he does once he's been paid.
He holds the patent on an anti-diarrhea vaccine he developed with Merck, Rototec, which has prevented thousands of hospitalizations in the U.S.
When you read how much money I'm making, you're going to shit yourself. Unless you've taken this up-the-butt vaccine from Merck.
And future royalties for the vaccine were just sold for $182 million cash. Dr. Offit's share of vaccine profits, unknown.
The reason that it's unknown is because if you found out about it, it would make you love Dr. Offit so much. He'd be in real risk of people taking vaccines that induce diarrhea simply so we could give him that vaccine, then drink his. Out of love.
There's nothing illegal about the possible conflicts of interest.
That's actually even worse, isn't it? The fact that there's nothing illegal about it. That's a demonstration of at least one more layer of corruption. And the entire legislative system supports and endorses it because it's an interlocked bureaucratic grid that ensures that you will never have any money, and they always will.
The American Academy of Pediatrics, Every Child by Two. And
Every Child by Two, I think, gave away something of their agenda when they named their company Every Child by Two. And we spoke to Every Child by Two. What do you think should happen? Well, to be clear, we think that by the time they're 2, not just 1 or 2 or some children, but every child should be vaccinated. Let me just talk to Paul Offit about how many. Up to 10,000. Also, try 10,000 bananas. Could it hurt?
Every Child by Two and Dr. Offit wouldn't agree to interviews, but all told us they're upfront about the money they receive, and it doesn't sway their opinions.
That's right. That's why people give each other money, to not have their opinions swayed.
Today's immunization schedule now calls for kids to get 55 doses of vaccines by age 6. Ideally, it makes for a healthier society.
50 is, by my reckoning, too many. But then I don't earn any money out of vaccines. Just colostrum. Give it a go. Paul Offit, he must be thinking, oh my word, 9,950 vaccines to go. I don't want to ever go on a long car journey with him as he sings his way through 10,000 child vaccines hanging from, I don't know, a pharmacy shelf. That sort of thing. Then there is the intervention from another former CDC director, Walensky, who recently suggested that if vaccine manufacturers are not protected from liability injuries, they may simply choose not to make vaccines. That statement should have detonated public debate. Instead, it passed with little scrutiny. But that's pretty crazy. If they're only making it for a profit, it tells you what they're up to anyway, even though we all know that's how the pharmaceutical industry is run. Don't you see how radical revision is required within the medical institutions that we entrust our health to? They need to have a completely different perspective about what they're doing. They have to understand once more that they're supposed to be helping people. No one minds people making a profit if what they offer is a valuable product. But the idea that the pursuit of product has become so reified and so elite and so extreme that it sort of doesn't matter if people die as a result of taking your product. That's too far, man.
The reason that the vaccine schedule is important is because it informs the policy of the Vaccines for Children's program. And this is a program that delivers vaccines free of charge to our children who are under and uninsured. And the reason that that is so important is because we need population protection whether or not those children have insurance. And it is that program that I think is at risk based on the schedule.
Let's at least credit Rochelle Walensky for being a kind of gorgeous supervillain and apparently aware of it, dressing in Cadbury's purple, or as I would have it, late 80s Joker purple, to really give you a true sense of her bureaucratic, anarchic willingness to destroy humanity. With a smile.
We acknowledge that there are true, albeit rare, injuries associated with vaccines. And when they are adjudicated, those people should merit some compensation for those injuries. In order to keep our both physicians and our manufacturers free of responsibility from that.
Yeah, she struggled for a minute to say free of responsibility because some essential part of her knows vaccine manufacturers are responsible for their products.
Rare injuries. There is this program
that's her humanity coming through there. She's not able to finish the job properly because she's like, oh, this isn't right. What I'm saying is not right. I don't believe in this. She doesn't believe in it. She's a child of God. Implies that products generating billions in annual revenue cannot remain viable unless the companies producing them are shielded from the consequences of harm. That's not a scientific argument. It's an economic one. It's always been an economic one. Shows you how radical the changes have to be. The contradiction becomes impossible to ignore when Walensky's past statements are revisited. In 2021, she said that real-world monitoring finds vaccines are safe for young children. Since then, the FDA has acknowledged deaths temporarily associated with COVID vaccination in children and has initiated investigations into those outcomes. Why is there such a stark lack of consistency in arguments around healthcare in the United States of America? Or it's generally accepted that it's at least morally dubious to profit from medicine, certainly in the extreme and monopolizing ways that's become normalized across US healthcare. How come that argument is abandoned when it comes to vaccines? That no one makes the argument that profit-driven vaccine models are likely to lead to vaccines being licensed and protected and granted legal indemnity that may be harmful? Well, we're seeing the consequences now, and due to the kind of clarity available as a result of independent media, we're learning about it, and we're learning it quickly, and it's inducing change in a variety of areas, perhaps none more clear than this one, precisely because the science has flipped, precisely because you can corroborate arguments that you might have made in 2019 or 2020 about vaccines and social measures used during the pandemic period with new data that actually verifies and underwrites the perspective of dissenters rather than those that were rolling their eyes and shaming people who were called anti-vaxxers with like 9 X's in the middle of the word vaxxer. Whether causation is ultimately confirmed in every case is beside the point. What matters is that the certainty once projected was not justified. The claim of settled science collapsed under the weight of reality, which is actually what science does. This is not a failure of science. It's the failure of a politicized scientific class that confused authority with truth and consensus with evidence. Science advances through skepticism, challenge, revision, conversation, clinical trial, debate. Those mechanisms throughout the COVID period were suspended in favor of messaging discipline. The result was not clarity, but fragility. The moment contradictions emerged, public trust began to rot. Naturally, the media sits at the centre of this crisis. News outlets are now forced to report official findings, acknowledging that vaccines can cause heart damage, particularly in younger populations. At the same time, those very outlets continue to run glowing, nostalgic stories about the triumph of the COVID vaccine 5 years on. The tension is obvious and glaring. Harm is acknowledged in one column while success is celebrated in another, as if the two realities are somehow commensurate. This contradiction is not accidental. The pharmaceutical industry is one of the largest advertising forces in American media. In 2024 alone, drug companies spent $10.1 billion on prescription drug advertising across television, print and digital platforms. This financial relationship doesn't require explicit censorship. That would be ridiculous. It creates an atmosphere where certain questions are softened, certain voices elevated, and certain conclusions delayed. What we're witnessing now is not anti-science backlash. It's a belated demand for scientific integrity. The public's not rejecting evidence, it's rejecting the idea that evidence should be filtered through political necessity and corporate protection before it's shared. The war between the old and the new scientific ruling classes reveals a dangerous truth. When science becomes a tool of governance rather than a method of inquiry, it stops serving the public and starts managing it. COVID did not create this problem, it exposed it. If science is to regain trust, it must be separated from propaganda, liability shields and media capture. Uncertainty must be admitted, harm must be confronted honestly, and authority must once again be earned through transparency rather than enforced through fear. The alternative is far darker, a future where every public health intervention is met with suspicion, not because people reject science, but because they remember what happens when science is used to silence instead of inform. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments in the chat. In the meantime, if you can, stay free. Thanks for watching the video. Have a look at this one over here, or join us Monday, Wednesday and Friday on Rumble.